Canada just did something almost no one saw coming. In a continent long dominated by the political and economic gravity of Donald Trump, Prime Minister Mark Carney has decided to challenge the established order. Not with threats, sanctions, or speeches, but with an economic strategy that could reshape the industrial balance of all North America. What began as a simple response to Trump's tariffs on steel and lumber has evolved into a historic turning point. Carney is not merely reacting. He is drawing a new long-term blueprint for Canada's economic future. And in doing so, he is forcing the world to question whether the United States can still claim uncontested supremacy as the hemisphere's industrial and financial engine. The conflict started with a unilateral decision. Trump, in an effort to protect American industry, imposed a 50% tariff on Canadian steel and a 45% tariff on Canadian lumber. What he presented as a defense of American jobs quickly became a direct blow to one of the United States' oldest and most loyal partners. But this time, Canada didn't stay still. Mark Carney, an economist with global credentials and a former central banker, understood immediately that this was more than a commercial dispute. It was a political opportunity. He capitalized on the shock to launch a national reconstruction program with a message as clear as it was disruptive. Canada will no longer depend on Washington's goodwill. The plan is bold. Ottawa announced a series of measures that include direct subsidies for steel and lumber companies, reduced rail shipping costs for domestic transport, low-interest loans for affected industries, and a multi-billion-dollar fund to boost national production. But the most revolutionary element is the mindset shift. Canada is no longer seeking privileged access to the U.S. market. It is seeking to replace it. Carney said it plainly. The era in which 75% of Canadian exports flowed into the United States is over. And behind those words lies a harsh reality. Every time Washington changes the rules, Canada pays the price. Every time Trump raises tariffs, a factory closes, a job disappears, and an entire community enters crisis. The Canadian response aims to break this cycle. The new plan limits foreign steel imports, imposes a 25% tariff on derivative products, and requires that steel and lumber used in public works come from Canadian sources. The measure not only protects jobs, it begins to redraw the country's industrial architecture. Yet the most important shift isn't numerical, it's political. For the first time in decades, Canada is talking openly about economic independence, not cooperation or alignment. And that message is deeply uncomfortable for the White House. Trump responded in predictable fashion. He abruptly broke off trade negotiations with Ottawa and accused Carney of sabotaging the bilateral relationship. The catalyst was a public campaign out of Ontario criticizing U.S. tariffs. Trump considered it a personal insult. Carney considered it the perfect opportunity to show leadership. The confrontation is not just political. It is symbolic. Trump embodies an economy of walls, protectionism, and suspicion. Carney represents a strategy of bridges, stability, investment, and long-term thinking. Two opposing visions of how to face a transforming world. And the results are beginning to show. Since the announcement of Canada's incentives, several U.S. and European companies have begun evaluating the relocation of part of their production to Canadian territory. The reasons are straightforward: regulatory stability, cheaper energy, and a government that offers certainty instead of threats. In the United States, rising tariffs are driving up production costs and injecting uncertainty. In Canada, subsidies and exemptions are widening the playing field. Where Trump builds barriers, Carney builds advantages. And capital, always pragmatic, is already moving. Canada's steel industry, employing over 23,000 people, is seeing a revival it hasn't experienced since the 1970s. In provinces like Ontario and Alberta, plants are rehiring, foundries are restarting operations, and local supply chains are turning again. Meanwhile, the lumber sector, historically battered by U.S. tariffs, has begun redirecting production toward domestic markets and partners in Europe and Asia. Carney's objective is clear: rebuild Canada's industrial base on three pillars. First, reduce dependence on the U.S. market. Second, stimulate domestic consumption of Canadian materials. Third, attract investment seeking a stable refuge from Washington's political chaos. And this is not rhetorical. Ottawa is injecting billions of Canadian dollars into aid programs and infrastructure projects to ensure that domestically produced steel and lumber are used in national construction. Homes, bridges, railways, public buildings. The policy creates immediate multiplier effects. It strengthens industrial employment, boosts transportation and logistics, revives energy demand, and mobilizes financial markets. Canada is betting on integrated development, not reactive defense against Trump. In Washington, the consequences are becoming hard to ignore. The breakdown of production chains with Canada is raising costs for U.S. companies. Agricultural and manufacturing firms see Canadian steel becoming more expensive, delivery times lengthening, and international competitors filling the gap. Meanwhile, Trump continues insisting that tariffs protect American jobs, even as the data contradicts him. Rising material prices are hitting the automotive, construction, and heavy machinery sectors directly. Whether Trump admits it or not, his policy is pushing more companies to look north. Here lies the paradox of this trade war. Tariffs intended to strengthen the United States are strengthening Canada instead. Carney, with his more measured style, is achieving what few Canadian leaders ever have, turning his country into a protagonist. Each press conference draws global attention. Every policy shift reverberates in international markets as if it came from a major power. Canada, quietly, is becoming the stable alternative to Washington's volatility. But beyond the numbers and announcements, what's truly at stake is the model of leadership. Trump governs through impulse and aggression. Carney governs through strategy and foresight. One bets on fear and confrontation, the other on stability and coordinated development. The contrast doesn't just shape trade policy, it defines the kind of nation each leader represents. As the United States retreats into nationalist rhetoric, Canada is building a narrative of modernization, sustainability, and independence. And the contrast is starting to reshape global perception. Major international investors now view Canada as more predictable than the United States. Tech and energy companies are exploring new opportunities there, while multilateral institutions praise its long-term thinking. The conflict also has domestic political dimensions. In the U.S., tariffs have sparked division within Congress and among industrial states. In Canada, Carney's response has generated consensus. Government officials, business leaders, and unions agree. It was time to stop depending on an unpredictable neighbor. In just a few months, the narrative flipped completely. Trump, who sought to punish Canada, ended up giving Carney the perfect justification to launch structural transformation. And Carney, far from playing the victim, positioned himself as the architect of a new economic era. The challenge is enormous. The integration between the two economies runs deep, and unraveling it will require time, investment, and sacrifice. But the shift has already begun. Trade routes are being redesigned, export contracts renegotiated, and provinces most reliant on the U.S. are drafting their own substitution strategies. In the coming years, Canada could become the first country on the continent capable of truly competing with the United States for industry and investment. Not with lower wages or tax tricks, but with stability, planning, and long-term vision. In this landscape, Trump has lost something far more valuable than a negotiation. He has lost the monopoly on economic influence in the North. His tariff strategy triggered a reaction he never anticipated. If Canada consolidates its industrial independence, history will remember this as a turning point he caused and failed to foresee. Because behind every tariff lies a political message. Trump's message was clear: America first. Carney's is deeper. Canada can choose its own destiny. This confrontation will not be resolved with speeches, but with outcomes. Trump bets that Canada's increased costs will eventually overwhelm Carney's plans and force him to retreat. Carney believes discipline, investment, and national cohesion will prove the opposite. Meanwhile, tensions rise. The bilateral relationship is frozen, trade flows are shrinking, and the two most integrated economies on the planet are beginning to behave like rivals. In the long run, history will mark this moment as a turning point, when a country that long lived in the shadow of a giant decided to walk on its own. And although it will take months or years to see the full outcome, the message is already clear. Canada is done being the obedient partner. It wants to be the respected competitor. The question now is what the United States will do next. Will it reconsider its policies before the damage becomes irreversible? Or will it cling to a strategy that isolates allies and erodes its own power? The clash between Carney and Trump is not a battle of personalities. It is a war of models. One looks inward, the other looks ahead. One builds walls, the other builds bridges. And in that contrast lies the future direction of North America. Because if history has taught us anything, it is this: empires do not fall from foreign invasions. They collapse under the weight of their own leaders' decisions. Like and subscribe to Critical Point to stay ahead of the global power shifts.